And we are live. And before I introduce our very special guest, I just want to say to Ben Hodges, who is our very special guest. Ben, it's been a while since you and I talked. I think it's been about a month, actually. And in the meantime, I was able to do some background check on you, some due diligence, and I discovered something very interesting. As most American from European descent your family had to come through Ellis Island in New York, which is the immigration point, as my family did. And as most families did from Europe, they couldn't spell the last names very well. If it was anything other than Smith, they usually misspelled it. They did it to me. So I'm here to tell you, Ben, and you may not know this, that your real last name is not Hodges, it's Haggiatini. And your grandfather, who was the first Haggiatini to set foot on these shores, his first name was Luigi. So you are a direct descendant of Luigi Haggiatini, which the reason I'm telling you this, I always knew you were a Paisan. So thank you very much. And I welcome you to the No Delusions on Paisan Haggiatini.
I hate to break it to you, but my family came on a Irish debtor prison ship to Georgia to help Lord Oglethorpe set up the colony of Georgia. So I like your story better.
Well, I didn't want to tell you the truth. I thought this one sounded more romantic, but we'll go with that one too. To me, you'll always be Paisan Haggiatini, but be that as it may. What we're going to discuss today is not as funny as that. Unfortunately, it's a tragedy that's...
You can look into me for the next episode. You'll have more luck with my background.
Well, we can talk about Jonathan's background and how you're both British and Irish criminals.
You'll have more luck with my background. We'll do that in the next episode.
All right, okay. Don't get me going. I'll lose my voice again. In any event, we are here to talk about what's going on in Iran first and foremost, and as it relates to the rest of the world, specifically Europe and NATO. As most of you who follow us are aware and follow the news at all, there's been a 2-week ceasefire declared between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Iran claims that it's already been violated because Israel's refused to accept the terms of the ceasefire, and in fact has continued to bomb Lebanon, Beirut in particular. And I just want to post this. Ben and I were just talking about this off air. These are the 10 points that were originally presented by Iran. We don't know, meaning we, the media or the public, don't know exactly what was put forth to the White House and Israel, how many, if any, of these were accepted. But if even a majority or half of these were accepted, this to me, and Ben, you can disagree with me or correct me, this to me is not a victory for the United States. This is a total loss. This is a tail between your legs kind of a thing. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot that we don't actually know. The actual whatever 10 points were presented by the Iranians that the president said were a good basis for the discussion. There's disagreement over whether or not Lebanon was included in the ceasefire. And what we're seeing is a result of a White House that has lost credibility in its messaging, and also the result of not having professional diplomats actually involved in these negotiations. And so these are the kind of mistakes that come out. You know, the Iranians, Persians, they've been doing this for about 3,000 years. And so I think that there's a combination of mistakes, errors, and a desire by the administration to constantly get out and say, we've done this, it's the best ever, the most historic anything, without it being true.
Do you believe that one of the points that really gets home to me, at least, as being one of our biggest losses, if it's true, was the demand by Iran that America withdraw all its assets from the Middle East? Do you believe that we're going to do that?
Absolutely not. I do believe that Iran probably demanded that, but I think even this administration would not be willing to do that. It would be such a problem for the Israelis to be left alone, and frankly, for all the Arab states in which the United States has invested so much, and vice versa. So I think that was a that was probably a starting anchor position from the Iranian side.
I agree. And one other point I just want to interject here before we go any further. One of the victory laps that's been made, one of the things that both Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump have been saying as one of the things we've achieved is the change in regime, which was, I don't really even get into that. But the fact of the matter is, yeah, we changed the regime and it's probably a little bit worse. I just want to read one paragraph here about the new leader of Iran, which is the son of the old leader that we killed. His name is Mojtaba Khomeini. And just briefly on him, unlike his father or other clerical elites, Mojtaba, 56, has never given a speech or a sermon in public, run for public office, or held a major clerical leadership post. That said, Mojtaba is not a departure from the system, but is its purest product, embodying repression, corruption, and ideological militancy. As supreme leader, he will rely heavily on the IRGC, tightening the bond between the barracks and the pulpit. Ben, I think it's worse. I think what we've done is to actually make the leadership of Iran more repressive and worse for the West and for the Iranian people than what they had before.
So I think one of the things we've all learned, or I have learned in the last few weeks, is that the supreme leader was not really the leader. It was the theocratic face of Iran, but that the real leaders, the real power was in the IRGC. So even though maybe the administration and the Israelis perhaps thought that if you take out the supreme leader and everybody hanging out with him, that then everything else would collapse. And clearly that's not what happened. And there's been some good writing in the last few weeks by people who have studied this, and it said it looks like the Iranians had prepared for that. One day, finally, the great Satan would actually, attack and would do this, would attempt a decapitation strike, and so that they had organized themselves to be able to survive that to some extent. Now, I'm having to read between the lines on this, but that's what it kind of looks like to me. And so maybe we have underestimated the resilience of the IRGC's, whoever's still there, and where the power sits in Iran. But your overall assessment, I would agree with.
Well, I agree with you, and it reminds me. No, I'm sorry, Jonathan, very quickly. It reminds me in a way of America misjudging what the reaction of the Iraqis when I was there by totally doing away with the government that was there, the Ba'ath leadership, and just dismissing everybody and thinking we knew what was best for the Iraqi people. And of course, we didn't. That turned into a long slog. I know from not just from being in Iran, I wasn't, but we didn't know very much of anything about the Iranian, the Persian culture, and the fact that what you said is correct. The IRGC runs everything, every facet of the Iranian life, of their culture, from the very, very top down to the grocery store on the corners. They're involved in that. We didn't quite get that. So decapitating the upper layers of the leadership, whether it's civilian, the Ayatollahs, the military, the police, really didn't have that much of an effect, at least as we thought it would. And you're right, including the Israelis. Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, we can go in many different directions. I think it's probably worth asking in a minute that actually, is it a relief that Karg Island and some military adventure wasn't sort of embarked upon? But the question I wanted to ask, I mean, we've talked here about the almost sort of the loss or the tally of loss versus gain, and it all seems to be loss on the US side. Is there another sort of almost unseen or unspoken thing here, which is the degradation of diplomatic credibility? It seems that Trump and his administration are prepared to promise anything to get to the end point. And at this point, their end point, desired end point, or they will say anything, agree to anything. Whether they do that is another thing. Can we also relate that back to Ukraine? Because we've had month after month after month of, we will do this and we'll have a minerals deal and we'll give you security guarantees. Whereas the end point as we've seen from the recently intercepted cables between Hungary and Putin, and the phrase there really jumps out: do anything, say anything to get Ukraine out of the way. It seems that there's no validity in what's being said or promised, which is an absolute degradation of any diplomatic credibility.
Well, as Joan Didion said about Oakland's, I think there's no there. It's well, I'm not going to speak for you, Ben, but just quickly to jump in. Yes, I think it's destroyed America's credibility in any way, shape, and form, including any diplomacy, because we never keep our word. And I don't want to go on from there. I'll rattle on, Ben.
Well, Jonathan, I think you you pose a very good question. When you don't have a clearly defined end state, or you don't have a set of sort of values that undergird all of your foreign policy, if it's entirely transactional and mercantilist in nature, then you go about making deals and doing whatever to achieve that short-term gain. And it does seem that that's what's going on. And it certainly has not helped that the State Department was gutted from the very beginning by the administration. And that the Secretary of State, Secretary Rubio, who knows better, I mean, a longtime senator and a one-time, strong advocate for NATO and all of that, he has abdicated that for whatever his reasons are. And now he also is dual-hatted as a national security advisor, which is ridiculous. I mean, both of these are full-time jobs. And so we don't have the professional diplomatic corps that we traditionally have had. And instead, the president chooses to rely on his business partner, Mr. Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Mr. Kushner, to handle whether it's Ukraine, Iran, and Gaza, I mean, every other thing that's out there. So if that's how you're doing it, everything looks like a Manhattan townhouse negotiation.
Ben, let's bring us back to Ukraine, because we don't have as much time as we would all love to discuss this.
Top that.
You'll top that by all means.
I'll top it up. These are Trumpian deals, though, where if you think you can get away with not paying your supplier, you will do so. So it seems to me they'll promise all sorts of things, but may have no intention of actually paying. So this isn't just your average business deal. This is a Trumpian business deal where you can get properly ripped off.
Yeah.
I agree. Ben, what is, in your opinion, what's Russia getting out of this? Are they, in fact, because, you read things on both sides. Russia's just way here on the top. They're getting everything they've always wanted. The disintegration of NATO, oil prices are going way up. People are taking their eye off Ukraine. Is this really a big advantage for Russia right now? And if so, is it permanent, or is it a temporary blip?
Well, certainly Russia is probably enjoying and reveling in the fact that there is zero pressure from the United States on them to do anything. I mean, sanctions have been relieved somehow. You mentioned the spike in oil prices. There are zero repercussions for the intelligence and aid that they're giving to Iran, which is targeting Americans, troops, and our partners in the region. Zero consequences for them for that. And then you've got the Vice President of the United States in Budapest echoing Kremlin talking points on behalf of Orban. So I would say Russia's having a pretty good week. At the same time, as bad as the language of the White House is towards NATO, and as really, I can't think of the right word, but unimpressive performance by the Secretary General, I'm not prepared to predict the destruction of NATO. I mean, this alliance has been through so much since 1949. It's been through some very, very challenging times. And whether we're talking about the Suez crisis or the French pulling out or the Greeks and the Turks fighting each other at the end of the day, we would kind of weather through it. And I think that if nations are taking a long-term view of their relationship with the United States and of the importance of the alliance, with or without the current administration, I think most will agree we are much better off with a NATO that is not operating at full capacity, i.e., without a strong, positive American leadership or a strong British military capability and other deficits. The Russians are waiting to see, okay, if the U.S. does this, does everybody else begin to slink away also? And I think most nations, particularly those who live closest to Russia, who know Russia the best, understand what's at stake. And so I'm not a doomer on NATO yet.
Isn't that the dangerous inflection point, though? Whereas peel the US away temporarily, then he's got a small window to do whatever he wants to do, to attack or fragment the alliance or commit some kind of hybrid assault. He may see this as a finite window of opportunity. China may also see the same.
Certainly that's a possibility, but I think that the Russians are in such bad shape themselves right now. I mean, I love the irony of President Zelensky, who 14 months ago was getting yelled at in the Oval Office by President Trump and Vice President Zelensky, saying, "You got no cards." And now Zelensky comes to the Middle East, and he's helping the Arabs protect themselves from Iranian drone strikes. And it's probably going to turn into a massive economic benefit that will surpass whatever EU money that that Orban has been blocking. The Arabs will end up paying that much to help to Ukraine, investing in Ukraine defense industry. And the Russians, I think, are on the back foot and getting worse. So I should never say the Russians will never use the opportunity that you highlight. I just think it seems very unlikely, especially if European countries invest in Ukraine's ability to launch long-range precision strike against Russia's oil and gas. That's the best way to defend Europe, is make sure that Ukraine wins. China, I just don't think that that they are, number one, prepared. I mean, to make a move on Taiwan, this is a significant military operation. I think they would much rather find another way to do it than having to actually get out there. And the U.S. and probably other allies would have to respond to that.
Ben, I agree
Might
with you.
they
What
choose
about if China were to
blockade,
blockade?
over-
Yeah, there you go, Jonathan. I agree. What about a blockade?
Yeah,
A
I think
Chinese
that
blockade, because based on what China's seeing, I don't think Trump's going to lift a finger.
I also would agree that this administration would not be willing to go to war over Taiwan, but I think it kind of depends on other factors. I mean, you know, and is China prepared to suffer the economic consequences? I think China has a lot of vulnerabilities once you get away from China. I mean, they need oil, and they're totally dependent elsewhere for their energy, and their economy depends on exports. And so I think the President Xi sees his vulnerabilities. So obviously I could be wrong, but I don't see it being likely that they would seize this window.
And if Ukraine was losing badly, they may be tempted to be bolder, both Russia and China. But it seems we've reached an inflection point here as well, where Russia is incrementally losing ground. They have seemed to have been losing more troops than they're able to recruit. We have the internet shut off in Moscow. We have lots of weird stuff going on. I mean, there is systemic weakness there. And Ukraine, despite many issues it also has in recruitment, is dramatically increasing the number of drones on the front and the effectiveness, do you see that we've hit a real turning point in some respects?
Yeah, it was several months ago when the new defense minister in Ukraine said that their goal was to create 50,000 Russian casualties a month. And I thought, what? I mean, wow. And yet they're on the way to reaching that. I mean, they're at 35,000 something now. And I can see this is more than just saying we're going to adopt an attrition strategy. I mean, there's a math to it. And the Ukrainians have always known Russia much better than any of us would ever know the Russians. And I think that the Russians also, certainly some people in Russia must be able to see how this is turning against them. So to call it an inflection point is probably right. It's hard to imagine it swinging back the other way.
Well, you've got a lot of Russian bloggers, really pro-Kremlin types on social media that are giving a lot of compliments to the Ukrainians for the first time. They've done it in the past, but the Russian bloggers that have the influencers in Russia on social media, they're giving it to the Ukrainians and saying, look, they're the innovators. They're the brave ones. We're the cowards. We're losing. We suck. And these are people that are basically risking their lives by saying such things. I just read today where it looks like the Victory Day celebration in Moscow may be called off. That's a big deal because they're afraid that even if Ukraine doesn't attack the actual parade, that just calling an air raid defense would shatter the credibility of the Kremlin to defend Russia. So, yeah, I mean, Ukraine's really, really shattered the illusion of the Russians about the Russian army and the Russian government.
They may not have any tanks available for the parade anyway.
That's true. Well, fake ones, yes, but some Potemkin tanks. But you're right. But no, I really mean that. If they cancel that parade, that's a big psychological hit to the Russians. I ask you this off air. I haven't read anything about the meeting between the NATO Secretary Mark Rutte and Donald Trump, and I really expected some kind of a statement from either the White House or NATO Brussels or something, and I've read nothing. How do you interpret that, if at all?
Well, unlike in the past, there was no cozy sort of moment between the Secretary General and the President where they shook hands and laughed and, that kind of thing. And there was no press availability. The Secretary General entered and left the White House without any sort of engagement. So that could be a signal. And I believe that the President slammed the alliance on a Truth Social right after the meeting was over. So, what the good news is that Senator Rubio helped lead to get legislation in place when he was still Senator Rubio to make it that no president could just arbitrarily walk away from NATO. Now, of course, what the president can do is what every president could do, could direct where do we have our troops, what do we have over there in Europe. So I could imagine something like that happening, but I just hope that the military leadership will make it clear to the president and the Secretary of Defense that, look, just because you're pissed off at Spain, we really need Marone and the other base that we have a naval
Rhoda.
base.
Yeah.
Say again?
Rhoda,
Yeah,
naval base.
Rhoda and Marone are
Yeah.
two really important places for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force. Same is true for the bases we have in Italy or Greece and Turkey and Germany and so on. And so I imagine that there'll probably be some things like that to show that he's taken action. But the fact is, most of them don't really understand how the alliance works, why it's to our benefit. Now, it is still a fair criticism. It's unbelievable to me that armed forces of UK are as small as they are. And the president is correct that, European nations depend on so much that comes out of the Persian Gulf. So I think a more proactive stance by Europeans saying, hey, Mr. President, we got this one. We will use all of our combined economic and diplomatic pressure on Iran to make sure, that the international water remains international water and freedom of navigation is assured. It won't be a U.S. Navy or a Royal Navy ship that opens the strait. It's going to be the government in Tehran recognizing that they are better off opening that strait, and that will come from economic and diplomatic pressure.
And charging a toll, which is something we didn't have to do before. We may now have the humiliation of paying Iran to use sections which essentially isn't their territorial water. I'm going to ask a very political question here. This is my last question because I know we're running out of time. Mark Rutte seems to have one tool for dealing with Donald Trump, and it's appeasement and sycophancy, and rather unctuous sycophancy at that. Is this really dangerous? Because if he's not prepared to talk power or talk truth to power, if he's not prepared to put the European case, then unfortunately he'll carry on propping up essentially a zombie alliance or agreeing to things that in the end we should walk away from.
Yeah, I think European allies and Canada have a lot more power, agency than he conveys. And now it's easy for me to say this, but if you add together the economic power, the military, the industrial capacity of all the countries of Europe, plus Canada, and of course, including UK, it dwarfs Russia. And so Secretary General said, all right, well, Mr. President, you'll always be welcome. You're still a member, whatever, you're not required to have 80,000 troops in Europe. But please know, when you start reducing America's presence on the ground and at sea in the European theater, it puts American strategic interests at risk. But the rest of NATO, will still be able to defend ourselves. It'll just be a whole lot harder, but it's on us. And so this is what I'm starting to hear from people like the German Bundeskanzler Merz, the French president, the Italians, and obviously everybody up in the north and in the Baltic states. They're like, with or without the U.S., we live next to these Russians, and we've got to be able to defend ourselves. Finland has more artillery than anybody else in Europe, and they have a wonderful system for rapid mobilization. So I think that Secretary General Rutte, he didn't ask my advice, and understandably, but I think his approach has worn out. I mean, certainly there cannot be any serious person that thinks flattering President Trump will get you anything more than new opportunities to continue flattering.
Ben, one last question from me, and then I know you got to go. I get it. I would be remiss, though, at this point in our history of not asking you, do you believe that we're at such an inflection point here in the States that senior military leaders are going to have to, not just, well, let me just ask you, refuse illegal orders from the president when they come down, and they're going to come down if they haven't already. Are we there? Are we close? And do you have confidence that they will refuse such orders when given?
Well, there's a reason we constantly reinforce our oath to the Constitution over and over and over at every promotion ceremony, at every reenlistment, so that every member of the military understands that their loyalty is to the Constitution, not to any one person. I am confident that the vast majority of officers would absolutely fulfill their oath. I can't obviously account for every single one of the tens of thousands of senior officers there, but I am very confident. Now, what should be happening, and what I do believe is happening, is that senior leaders are telling the secretary behind closed doors that we're not going to do this. That's an illegal order, whether it's to use military force against Greenland or to bomb civilian targets. These are absolutely illegal, and we're not going to do it. So, but Mr. Secretary, and this is what the people have always done. I understand what you're trying to achieve. Maybe here's another way we can do it, but we're not going to carry out an illegal order. Now, again, as an old retired person, it's easier for me to say this It's a little bit harder when you're staring it right in the face. And there's a difference between terrible policy and an illegal order. If it's a terrible policy or a stupid order, but it's not illegal, you do your best to fix it, but you still are bound to do it. So being able to know that difference between stupid order and an illegal order, and you better be right.
Ben, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. I'm sorry that I even had to ask that question, but thank you for your sincere answer to that. And Jonathan, also man on the street there in the UK. We're going to have to wrap it up for now. Thank you both. And Ben, I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.